The prairie rested under a thin wash of late winter light, quiet enough that even the wind seemed to tread softly. Dust moved in slow spirals, drifting toward a lonely cabin crouched beneath cottonwoods. Inside, Mara Ellison sat beside a cold stove, her body folded inward as if guarding the last spark of strength. Hunger had hollowed her face and slowed her thoughts until each breath felt like work. She watched the door without expecting it to open. Cole Maddox had left months ago, taking his bright promises with him. She told herself she no longer waited for him, but the heart holds on long after pride gives up. Across the open land, Wyatt Calder guided his horse along a frost-rimmed fence line. He rode with the steady weariness of a man carrying more burden than he spoke of. Drought had thinned his cattle, debts crowded his days, and the loneliness of tending a ranch alone pressed at him. Still he rode, because quitting was not in him. Today the air felt strange, as if the land whispered a warning. When he reached the ridge above Mara's cabin, he frowned. Every winter evening he had passed this way, smoke curled from her chimney. Tonight there was none. He slowed his horse, listening. Only wind. Out here, silence rarely meant peace. He nudged his horse toward the cabin, each step deliberate, as though the earth beneath him might shift. A heaviness gathered in his chest, the kind that grew when something wasn't right. He wasn't a man ruled by impulse, but something urged him forward, a quiet pull he didn't question. Inside, Mara tried to rise when she heard hooves, but her knees failed and she gripped the stove. She wasn't ready for anyone to see her like this, but the sound pushed her toward the door. The room swayed, darkening around the edges. A faint memory of warmth flickered, someone knocking gently, someone staying, but it faded as quickly as it came. Wyatt dismounted quietly. He approached the porch and tapped once on the door. It sagged open. Mara knelt on the floor, one hand braced, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes rose to meet his with a mixture of exhaustion and apology, as though she feared troubling him simply by existing. He stepped inside without pause. "Easy," he said, voice steady and low. She tried to straighten, but her strength slipped and she swayed. He caught her by the forearms, guiding her into a chair. His hands were rough yet careful, as though he feared she might break. For a moment, the silence between them felt like a fragile bridge, built in an instant yet carrying more weight than either expected. Mara looked away. Kindness unsettled her more than hardship. "I'm all right," she whispered, though both knew she wasn't. Wyatt scanned the room, the bare shelves, the empty stove, the thin blanket. The truth was plain. A sharp, protective ache rose in him, surprising in its force. He crouched beside her. "Please," he said, "get up and pack your things." She stared at him, startled. He didn't know her, yet he spoke as if her future mattered. She searched his face for pity and found none, only quiet resolve, the kind that steadies rather than shames. "No one makes it alone out here," he added softly. Something shifted in her, a loosening of the fear she had carried too long. She didn't speak, but she didn't resist when he helped her stand. That small silence became agreement. They stepped into the fading dusk. The horizon glowed faintly, light clinging to the world's edge. Wyatt steadied her as she approached his horse, his touch firm enough to keep her upright. Mara felt the strangeness of being helped and wasn't sure whether it comforted or frightened her. A faint tremor ran through her, but for the first time in months, she wasn't falling alone. As they prepared to ride, a stillness settled over the land, the kind that hinted at change. Neither turned west to notice the rising plume of dust, a sign that someone rode toward them, someone who believed he still had a claim on the life Mara was leaving behind that day. Wyatt lifted Mara onto the saddle with the same care he used when handling an injured colt, making sure she was steady before mounting behind her. The dusk had thinned into a pale wash of evening, cool enough to raise shivers along her arms. She leaned forward, not out of trust but necessity, her strength flickering like a wavering lantern. The horse shifted beneath them, patient and warm, and Wyatt guided it toward the narrow trail across the plains. For a long while, neither spoke. Their silence felt less like distance and more like a fragile thread binding two weary souls who no longer knew how to ask for anything. Wyatt's coat brushed lightly against her back. Mara noticed how he left a careful inch of space, as if afraid that crowding her might cause her to retreat inside herself again. She listened to the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves, letting the sound steady her thoughts. There had been a time when she believed silence meant safety, but Cole's absence had taught her that silence could also be abandonment. Now, riding through the quiet with Wyatt, she felt something unfamiliar, comfort that did not demand anything in return. The trail wound past abandoned homesteads, their roofs sagging like tired shoulders. Broken fences cast long shadows. Each ruin reminded her of how quickly a life could fall apart, how a single winter could swallow a future. She wondered what Wyatt saw when he looked at these remnants. He rode with the air of someone who knew hardship intimately, though he carried it without bitterness. "You've been alone out here too long," Wyatt said finally, his voice low. Mara didn't answer at first. She studied the land stretching endlessly before them. She wasn't sure how to explain the quiet fight she had waged each day just to stay alive. "I didn't choose it," she whispered. "But once he left, I didn't know how to rebuild." The words scraped out of her, thin and splintered. She expected Wyatt to press her, but he only nodded. Night settled, dressing the world in muted blues. Wyatt drew his coat around her shoulders without comment, and when she tried to protest, he shook his head. "Just until we reach the ranch," he murmured. She let the coat rest around her, surprised at its warmth, surprised at her own willingness to accept a kindness she hadn't earned. They rode beneath a sky pricked with early stars. Mara's strength faltered, and she slumped slightly. Wyatt steadied her with one arm, his touch secure yet respectful. The gesture brought a tight ache to her chest, something fragile awakening after too long in the dark. When the first lantern glow from Wyatt's ranch flickered into view, Mara felt her breath hitch. The homestead wasn't grand, but it radiated endurance, a place held together not by wealth, but by stubborn hope. A barn leaned slightly to one side, and the corral fence had been mended in several places, but the windows shone with soft light. As they approached, an older woman stepped onto the porch. Temperance Calder, Wyatt's aunt, stood with her arms folded and her expression sharp enough to slice through excuses. Her gray hair was braided tight, and her gaze moved instantly from Wyatt to Mara, reading more in a heartbeat than most people learned in a week. "So you finally brought her," Temperance said, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who had seen this moment coming long before either of them. Mara stiffened, embarrassment flaring, but Temperance's stern features softened. "Come inside," she said. "No soul deserves to freeze." She guided Mara toward the door, her hands surprisingly gentle. Wyatt lingered outside for a moment, watching the warm glow spill across the porch. Relief mixed with something deeper, something he was not ready to name. He glanced back toward the dark plains, a prickling sensation lifting along his spine. The horse snorted, unsettled. Far off in the distance, a faint speck of moving light flickered, too steady to be a star, too restless to be wind. Someone was riding the same trail they had taken, closing in with a purpose neither of them yet understood. It drew nearer. Dawn crept across the Calder ranch, brushing the horizon with a muted glow. Mara woke to the soft crackle of a hearth fire and the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the small bedroom Temperance had given her. For a moment she lay still, unsure whether the quiet warmth was real or a fragile dream stitched by hunger. But the steady hum of life, the creaking boards, the low voices, told her she was no longer alone on the far edge of the prairie. She rose slowly, stiffness easing as she wrapped Wyatt's coat tighter around herself. In the kitchen, Temperance was already bustling, her movements brisk and sure. Wyatt stood near the doorway, head bowed over a mug, as though gathering himself for another day of quiet burdens. When he glanced up, surprise flickered in his eyes at the sight of Mara standing on her own. It wasn't pride exactly, but something gentler, like hope testing its legs. "You should eat," Temperance said, placing a plate before her. Mara hesitated, overwhelmed by the simple kindness, then murmured her thanks. Wyatt watched her discreetly, as though afraid too much attention might send her retreating. Yet Mara felt steadier beneath his quiet gaze. After breakfast, Wyatt stepped outside to prepare for work. Mara followed, drawn by a pull she couldn't name. Frost clung to the fence posts, sparkling like scattered glass. Wyatt paused when he saw her, concern tightening his brow. "You don't need to help," he said. "I'd like to," she replied. Stillness reminded her too much of the days when no one came. Wyatt studied her, then nodded. Together they walked the edge of the pasture. The rhythm of small tasks, checking wire, scattering feed, wove a quiet companionship between them. Mara matched his pace, feeling the steadiness in him like a lifeline. They were nearing the far gate when a distant rider came into view, kicking up a trail of dust. Mara's breath stilled. Wyatt followed her gaze, his posture tightening. The rider grew clearer, and Mara felt her stomach twist when she recognized the slouched posture and familiar swagger. Cole Maddox halted a few yards away, his eyes landing on Mara with a hungry relief. "There you are," he said, tone warm and familiar, as though his leaving had been a misunderstanding. Mara stepped back. Wyatt shifted subtly, placing himself at her side without blocking her. Cole's gaze slid to Wyatt. "Didn't know she needed rescuing." Wyatt said nothing. Cole dismounted and approached Mara. "Come on now," he said softly. "You know this ain't where you belong. I was gonna come back sooner. Just needed time to sort things out." His smile looked practiced. Mara felt old wounds stirring. Wyatt's steady presence anchored her trembling courage. "You left," she whispered. Cole's expression tightened. "I had reasons. You should have trusted me." Wyatt's jaw flexed, but he stayed silent. "I trusted you too long," Mara said. Cole scoffed. "You making choices now because this rancher took pity on you?" Temperance stepped from the house, sharp eyes taking in the scene. She moved behind Mara, not touching her, just standing as a reminder that Mara was no longer without a place. Mara lifted her chin. "I'm not going with you." Cole's gaze darkened. "We'll see about that." He swung onto his horse and rode off, anger simmering beneath his skin, leaving a raw promise hanging in the cold air. Wyatt exhaled slowly, tension easing. Mara watched the distant dust trail fade, a tremor rippling through her as she realized the confrontation wasn't finished, only waiting for its next knock. She felt Wyatt beside her, steady as an old oak rooted against storm winds, and something warm flickered through the fear. Yet beneath that warmth stirred another truth. Cole's return had reopened a wound she thought hunger had swallowed, a wound that now bled uncertainty into the fragile safety she'd begun to trust. She sensed the past turning back toward her, gathering force, as though the next storm had already settled on the horizon and was slowly finding its way to her door. And when Wyatt gently touched her elbow, she understood the storm would test not just her strength, but the fragile bond forming between them now. The days that followed settled over the ranch like a gentle thaw, softening the sharp edges that fear had carved into Mara's spirit. Winter still clung to the plains, but the sun lingered a little longer each afternoon, warming the frostbitten earth. Mara found herself waking each morning with a steadier breath, a growing certainty that she belonged in the rhythm of this place. She helped Temperance gather eggs, learned the way Wyatt's horses liked their feed, and felt her body remembering strength after long months of hunger. Each small task stitched something back together inside her, though she couldn't name what was mending. Wyatt kept his distance in a way that wasn't distance at all. He moved through each day with quiet attentiveness, stepping in only when she faltered, never when she simply hesitated. He carried himself with a serenity that steadied her, yet he seemed unaware of the way she watched him, how his patience softened her guarded heart. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression he quickly hid, not out of shame but out of a gentle discipline, as though he refused to burden her with feelings she wasn't ready to face. One afternoon, as the sky ripened into soft gold, Wyatt asked her to ride with him to check the far pasture. Mara hesitated, the memory of falling from a horse years ago tightening her breath. Wyatt noticed without her saying a word. "You'll be all right," he said softly. "I'll be right beside you." He offered his hand, not insisting, simply waiting. Mara took it, surprised by how natural it felt. They rode out together, her horse steady beneath her, Wyatt close enough that she could sense his calm anchoring her frayed nerves. The prairie opened wide around them, its stillness carrying a fragile peace. Midway across the field, her horse stumbled on a buried rut. Mara lurched forward, a cry catching in her throat. Wyatt reached out and steadied her, his hand firm against her arm. The two of them froze in that moment, suspended between fear and relief, the world holding its breath around them. Mara felt the tremor in her limbs slow beneath his touch. When she finally looked up, Their gazes met with a raw honesty neither had dared before. "You're safe," Wyatt murmured. His hand lingered longer than it should have, and when he withdrew it, warmth followed the absence. Back at the ranch, Temperance watched them dismount with a knowing glint in her eye. "A horse tells you more about a person than 100 conversations," she said with a small smirk. Wyatt flushed slightly, and Mara felt a shy heat bloom along her cheeks. As evening settled in, a new pattern formed. Mara helped Temperance prepare supper while Wyatt tended to the horses. When he returned, dust softening the lines of his face, the three of them ate together at the small wooden table. Mara could feel the space beside Wyatt becoming a place of quiet comfort, a place where she could simply exist without bracing for disappointment. One night, after Temperance retired early, Mara stepped outside to breathe the crisp air. Wyatt stood near the corral, leaning against the fence as he watched the horses settle. She approached slowly, drawn not by necessity but by longing she hadn't yet admitted. "You work harder than anyone I've known," she said gently. Wyatt shrugged, eyes still on the horses. "Work is simple. People, they're complicated." Mara's heart tightened. "Do I make things complicated?" He turned toward her then, the lantern light catching the earnest lines etched across his face. "No," he said softly. "You make things clearer." The admission hung between them, delicate as a thread of smoke. Mara felt something shift deep within, a new breath filling the place's grief had emptied. Yet before she could speak, the horses in the corral skittered nervously, stamping against the dirt. Wyatt straightened, his expression sharpening. From the distant dark of the prairie, a lone figure approached, the silhouette unmistakable even in fading light. Cole Maddox was coming back. And this time, the way he rode carried a tension that warned the night itself to keep still around him. Night gathered around the ranch like a slow-closing hand, shadows thickening as Cole Maddox rode into the yard. His horse blew steam into the chilled air, hooves grinding the dirt with restless impatience. Wyatt stepped forward first, his posture calm but unmoving, the lantern light catching the steel of resolve in his face. Mara stood several steps behind him, fingers curled around the porch railing, her pulse thudding like a trapped bird. She had known Cole would return, but she had not expected the storm written so plainly across his features. Cole dismounted with a sharp, angry grace. "You think you can hide her from me?" he snapped, eyes cutting toward Mara with a heat that made her shrink back. "You think you can turn her against me?" Wyatt didn't flinch. "She isn't being turned," he said quietly. "She's choosing." Cole scoffed. "Choosing? A starving woman will choose anything if you make her grateful enough." His gaze softened into something coaxing, but the tenderness in his voice rang false. "Mara, sweetheart, don't let this rancher fill your head. You know you belong with me." Mara stepped forward, though fear trembled through her bones. "I don't," she said, her voice wavering. "Not anymore. You left me to fend for myself. You didn't look back." Cole's expression twitched. "I had reasons." "So did I," she whispered, "when I finally stopped waiting." Wyatt moved slightly, not to shield her, but to stand beside her instead of in front. The gesture steadied her more than any barrier could have. Cole noticed and his anger flared, bright and reckless. He stepped toward Wyatt, fists clenched. "You want to be the hero? Think you can do better than me?" Wyatt didn't raise his voice. "I'm not trying to be better. I'm just not leaving her behind." Cole swung. A wild, desperate punch fueled by pride and wounded ego. Wyatt caught the blow with a forearm, absorbing the impact without striking back. "I'm not fighting you," he said. "Not unless you force me to." Cole swung again, more furious this time. Wyatt moved back, refusing to answer violence with violence. The restraint in him was stronger than Cole's fury, and that only made Cole angrier. Mara cried out as Cole lunged a third time, but Wyatt stepped aside, letting the momentum send Cole stumbling into the dirt. Breathing hard, Cole pushed to his feet. His eyes burned as he looked between them. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." He mounted his horse in a single bitter motion and tore into the darkness, the sound of pounding hooves fading into the deep, unsettled night. Silence followed, heavy as snowfall. Mara felt her knees weaken, the adrenaline draining all at once. Wyatt turned toward her just as her strength gave out. He caught her gently, arms steady around her trembling form. For a long moment neither spoke. Mara felt the solid thrum of his heartbeat against her cheek, the warmth of him grounding her like roots finally finding soil. "Wyatt," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I didn't mean for any of this to fall on you." He shook his head, tightening his hold just enough to let her feel it. "Mara, nothing about you is a burden." The words came softly at first, then deeper, steadier, carrying the weight of truths he had held too long. "I tried to keep distance. I told myself you needed time, not pressure. But every day you were here, His breath caught. "I found myself caring more than I meant to." Mara lifted her head, tears glistening. "I thought I was alone in that." He cupped her face with a tenderness that unraveled the last of her doubt. "You weren't. I've loved you quietly from the moment I found you on that cabin floor." Mara leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. "And I began loving you the night I realized I was safe." The prairie wind hushed around them as if bowing to the moment, and in the lantern glow of the quiet ranch yard, love finally found its voice. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.